Anime games. Last year, the global anime industry was valued at just under $25 billion. The gaming industry was also valued at around $180 billion. And while these are both absolutely massive, the more interesting part to me is that in a poll conducted by Crunchyroll in 2017, 90% of the 10,000 anime fans surveyed identified as gamers. Many anime fans enjoy video games and are statistically more likely to play them than the average person. And yet, despite all this shared interest in these multi-billion-dollar industries, most anime games kinda suck. I mean, every single anime game is either a 2D Street Fighter clone, a 3D Arena Fighter, or a weird beat-em-up. That's it, and less than 10% of those end up being somewhat decent, let alone great. Not to mention the hundreds of low-effort iPhone games and Nintendo DS shovelware that all probably cost around $50 to make. Even just focusing on something like Dragon Ball, which has some of the best tie-in games out there with Dragon Ball FighterZ and the Budokai series, you can see way more bad games than good ones. There have been over 154 Dragon Ball games made since 1986, and I doubt even the most hardcore fans of the franchise have seriously enjoyed even a fraction of them. I think it's reasonable to say that whether you like or don't like the current state of anime gaming, we can all agree more good titles would be appreciated. So this video is going to be something a little different. Not only different to what I normally do, but different to what I've seen on YouTube. In this video, I want to pitch video game adaptations of anime that I think would actually be good. Now, the premise of the video is pretty simple. I've seen a fair bit of anime, probably way less than the average weeb, but still, and I want to come up with ideas for video games for some of the shows I've seen and manga I've read, because I think they deserve the AAA treatment. But while this video is silly and hypothetical, I want to try and take it at least somewhat seriously. My ideas will all be games that could be realistically made today. They're ambitious, sure, but not impossible. I'll even be listing existing games as inspirations and naming a few studios I think would be best to develop some of the ideas. This is all obviously fake, none of these games will ever be real, but I think keeping everything grounded like that just makes it more fun. I'll also be going as in-depth as I possibly can, because I just like doing that. In fact, having written this script, I went into way too much detail with hypothetical games and their mechanics, so I have cut this video down a bit for YouTube and put the full extended version of it up on my Patreon, linked in the description. If you really want a longer video talking about fake anime games, go check that out. And also, while I did say this idea is one I haven't seen on YouTube, that was a lie. Big shout out to the channels that have covered something like this before me, namely Mother's Basement and Nakey Jakey, who both have amazing videos about Made in Abyss and Nausicaa games that they would make. Both of those videos are linked in the description as well. And with all that out of the way, let's get into some actually good anime game ideas. Now, as you might guess, most anime games that are out there are made from shonen anime, because shonen anime is by far the most popular category, and also a bunch of dudes with powers beating each other up is just very easy to translate into a game. So let's start off simple with a game based on My Hero Academia, one of the most popular and marketable shonen airing today. And while MHA does have some games about it already, including a free-to-play battle royale game that's sort of close to my idea, most of them are mediocre at best, so let's make a good one. Basically, in My Hero Academia, because most of the show is about heroes, in academia, a lot of the filler training arcs are about exercises the heroes have to do. Namely, one of them in Season 5 that stuck out to me was a game where two teams had to fight each other in an industrial complex, with the goal of capturing members of the opposing team and bringing them back to a jail cell. And that team-based objective game they played just kinda reminded me of Overwatch, so that's exactly what my idea is. A My Hero Academia team-based PvP game inspired by Overwatch. The game would consist of several game modes, where two teams of 5 players would face off, each playing different heroes and villains in the My Hero universe, both trying to win by completing different objectives. It would be a third-person game, and each hero would have a regular attack combo, sort of similar to a fighting game, and a couple core skills they can use on cooldowns that do damage, move them around, or support teammates, as well as an ultimate that they could build up to with a meter of some sort. And I think My Hero in particular is perfect for this style of game, because pretty much every character already has video gamey quirks and ultimate moves you could easily translate into abilities and classes. You know, Deku being a melee DPS, or Araka being support, and Kirishima being a tank. Though, while there would definitely need to be a team deathmatch mode, I think most of the game would be objective based. And those objectives would either be centered around a heroes versus villains conflict or some form of training exercise like in the show. You'd have one where maybe one team has to save a bunch of civilians around the map while the other tries to stop them. You could do a capture game mode from the show where if you knock an opponent down, you can pick them up and carry them back to jail. And of course, you'd have to include a game mode where you push a payload because it's just a staple of the genre. Something unique to add, I think, would be what I would call a support hero system, where instead of making heroes like All Might playable, each map could have a certain powerful hero tied to it that if one team builds up enough points or a meter or does some side objective, then the next player to die could respawn as that hero for like a minute. And they're just OP as hell. Like you jump around the map as All Might, just one-shotting enemies for a bit. Very similar to the heroes in Battlefront. Obviously, like everything else in the game, there's some balancing you'd need to account for, but I think it would be a really fun system, and a way to include some of those pro heroes without nerfing the hell out of them. But honestly, the whole game just seems incredibly viable to me. It's simple and straightforward, you've got a ton of variety in characters and abilities, the maps and objectives could all be interesting, and with even half the polish of a Blizzard game, I think it would probably be the most financially successful game I'll ever pitch. You could sell skins for it, maybe add a campaign mode. There's a ton of potential. And continuing down the line of popular shonen anime, you have my anime list's favorite show of all time, Fullmetal Alchemist. Now, FMA also has some games made about it, and like My Hero, they are kind of similar to my idea. The games are these Square Enix action RPGs that kind of look like Kingdom Hearts if you bought it on Wish, which is no coincidence as the games were directly inspired by Kingdom Hearts. So my idea isn't even a brand new type of game. I just want a full-budget Square Enix action RPG Fullmetal Alchemist game. But instead of being inspired by Kingdom Hearts, I'd mold it after the Final Fantasy VII Remake. The game would be semi-open world, where the player visits different towns and locations throughout the story that you can explore and walk around and do side quests in, but a lot of it would still be streamlined and linear. That way most of the game would be focused on the grand visuals and story it's telling, and you just have these moments where the world opens up at certain points, just like walking around the different districts in Final Fantasy VII. The combat system would be the sort of real-time action RPG combat that Square Enix is best at. You've got melee combat and quick alchemy abilities the player can use and combo together, and then I'd treat more complicated alchemy like spells in Final Fantasy, where the player opens up a quick menu with a bunch of different options. And the stronger alchemy abilities would all probably be different archetypes for reactions the player could use, like an AoE ability or a targeted ranged attack, but what the attack does is all dependent on the environment. So every part of every combat arena would have these different elements in them, like metal in a city, or wood in a forest, or water near a river, and then all your main alchemy abilities would do something different based on what element you use them on. That way you can keep the abilities themselves simple, but then have them all actually react to the environment, which would be the best way to make you feel like an alchemist without having some sort of complicated alchemy system. The combat would also be party-based, having characters fight alongside you during different parts of the story and being able to give them commands and tell them to use their abilities. Maybe still keeping the player stuck as the one character, but having up to 3 or so teammates join the fight during later parts of the story, and you can tell them all what to do. And the best fit for the story would naturally be a retelling of the anime, playing as Edward and having Alphonse on your team as you go through the events of the story. But I do want to throw a curveball at you. What if the story had nothing to do with the plot of the anime? What if the main character was a video game original and their story was independent of the plot of the show? Now, obviously, this would be a less likely choice if a game were to be realistically made, but I think if it was written well and done right, it could potentially be incredibly successful as its own thing. Sort of like how the new Harry Potter game is just telling its own story. Either way, a story with new characters taking place in a different part of the world that's still important and grand and probably tying into the story of the anime so you can get those sweet character cameos would be ideal for a game like this. And with the treatment of a Final Fantasy VII Remake, it would just be gorgeous and incredibly fun to play. And speaking of games with amazing world building that I want to play as different characters in, you've got Cowboy Bebop. Now, I love this show with all my heart. It's one of my favorites of all time, but I think a game starring the main cast would be limited. After all, the Netflix show wasn't that good, and all it did was try to retell the story. I personally think a game version could be even worse. But the reason I love Cowboy Bebop is that on top of the characters and story, it just has the best world building. It is a genre-defining space western, and there is just not enough space western media out there. So what the show needs for its game, more than anything, is an RPG. One that lets you make your own character and tell your own story in the Cowboy Bebop world. And ideally, it would be an open-world adventure RPG made by Obsidian. So picture this, you start off the game as a fledgling bounty hunter. You create your character and pick different skills and perks like Fallout New Vegas, and then the story starts off just the same with your character getting dumped and left for dead on a small planet. You then go meet some wacky characters, do some quests for them, and buy your own spaceship, and then you can recruit allies to join your bounty hunter crew, and they can help you with missions and have their own stories going on. And at some point, the whole game just opens up to this intergalactic adventure, with the through line of trying to find the old bounty hunter partner that betrayed you. The whole thing would be set across a couple different solar systems. You'd be able to fly your ship and use astral gates to go between them, and every system would have a bunch of planets and space stations and asteroids and abandoned ships to explore. Then just fill each area with characters that are all unique and interesting, some of them being side characters from the show you can do quests for, most of them just being weird people and NPCs to give the whole thing charisma. Definitely add those 3 old dudes playing cards from the pilot episode, I love those guys. And each location might have gangs and factions that influence the world. You might be able to get caught up against the Syndicate or some of the other big players, maybe smooth talk your way into a crime family or help out the local government, all while collecting bounties that take you on crazy adventures just like the show. Though I will say the one possibly controversial part of this idea I have is that I think the game should be a top-down CRPG, similar to Disco Elysium or Divinity. I believe this is the best perspective to accommodate the gigantic size and complexity of the game I'd want while still being able to capture the nature of the show. First-person titles like Bethesda makes are almost always just way too demanding. Usually to make a game like that, you either have to make a small polished title like The Outer Worlds or a gigantic janky mess like Skyrim. And neither of those seems like a great option for the game. So top-down hits me as the best of both worlds. A big game with lots to do that can still have tons of details and fluidity, plus cool stylized art direction like Disco Elysium. And going along with the CRPG angle, the combat would definitely be turn-based. You could have some fleshed out cover shooting, almost like XCOM, but with less tactics and more cool moves. Basically, just let me judo throw a motherfucker like I'm Spike Spiegel. You'd be jumping into cover or doing a cool slide while firing guns at people, and then with the melee combat, it could just be running up to someone and disarming them or breaking their neck, and you'd be controlling different companions that could be snipers or melee characters or all these different archetypes. Oh, and also spaceship battles. You'd need cool dogfights in the game that would probably be a similar turn-based system, but with maneuvers like barrel rolls and all the sick flips that Spike and the gang do in the anime. Then the plot would definitely be structured similarly to New Vegas. You start off at rock bottom, probably after a betrayal because that works perfectly for Cowboy Bebop, and then you work your way up as a bounty hunter and get tied into some grand galactic faction war you have to resolve, all while hunting down the person who betrayed you. Having that hard-hitting personal story is a must. And because of all that, I think Obsidian is perfect, because the writing team they have is just fantastic. And I think they're one of the only studios that could really deliver on a great story, while also just writing dozens of wacky and memorable characters. Having Fallout New Vegas and Outer Worlds on their resume is really just icing on the cake, because they could definitely capture the space western vibe perfectly. It's just a match made in heaven. Now, this might be a curveball after all the talk of shonen fighters and RPG games that I just covered, but not every game is going to be some AAA masterpiece of world building and open world adventure, alright? Sometimes I just want to play some volleyball. And have you ever heard of a good volleyball video game? I mean, I haven't, besides Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball, which, let's be honest, nobody is playing for the in-depth volleyball mechanics. In fact, when you Google best volleyball video game, the first thing that shows up is there a Haikyu video game? And the answer is yes, on the 3DS. So I think it's pretty obvious that a good big budget Haikyu volleyball game would be pretty cool, because volleyball is a fun sport and Haikyu is a fun show, and a video game version of that would be fun to play. Now, I won't go into the nitty-gritty of how a volleyball game should work. I was originally going to write a giant dissertation on the mechanics and gameplay that an ideal volleyball game should have, but then I found this janky-looking title called Spike Volleyball on the PS4 that does a pretty good job of showing the basics of the gameplay, so now the video can be 20 minutes shorter. And it's a weird idea, but I really think the game should have a single-player campaign following the plot of the show. Like you maybe join Karasuno High School as an unnamed video game original character who joins the volleyball team as like an intern on the sidelines. That way the game can have Persona-esque high school simulator segments in between matches where you can talk to the characters and hang out with them, because a big part of Haikyu isn't just the volleyball, but the relationships between the characters. Then you can meet each of the characters and do volleyball practice with them, where you can train their skills and also tutorialize each of the different parts of volleyball. You know, learn to set with Kageyama, learn to spike with Hinata, play a practice game, etc. Then I'd have an in-game calendar that moves forward with each practice and interaction you do, and when it hits a game day, you get to play a full match. And there'd be scheduled tournaments and matches and everything just like the show. Though, with it being a Haikyu game, I would definitely have some special mechanics. Like, give each player a confidence meter that builds up throughout the match, and you can maybe press a button when someone hits a good shot that compliments them on that shot, and their confidence meter builds up faster. Then, if their meter is full, they can do a special move, like Kageyama and Hinata's ridiculous spike combo, or Tsukishima's kill block or something. Special moves and different hits could then have these stylized animations where the camera zooms in and it turns into a moment from the anime, with the motion lines and epic music and everything. And the opposing teams would even all have their own special moves, like the Iron Wall or that one dude who never misses a serve. Though, of course, on top of a campaign mode, I would also do local and online multiplayer, because playing a volleyball game with a friend on the couch seems like a no-brainer. I'd even let you build your own team from the roster of all the players in the show, so you can have this giant Smash Bros. Style screen where you can pick the best setters and blockers from all the different teams and play them against your friend or people online. And then, yeah, that's the game. It's pretty different from most of the anime games I'd think of, but that's also why I'd want it to be made. A cool volleyball game would be just so fun as a casual player compared to all the hardcore RPGs or fighting games most animes have. And I still don't know why there aren't any good big budget volleyball games at all, besides the ones with titties. Speaking of titties, Kill la Kill. Now, obviously, if you've seen my fan service video, you know I love this show. And while I do talk a lot about the aspects of it relating to plot and characters, I also know it's a trigger anime, which means the fights are the craziest shit you've ever seen in your life, and would be perfect for a video game. And the anime already does have an arena fighter that's honestly surprisingly good for how few people talk about it. I mean, it even includes a video game original what-if storyline. But it is just blatantly obvious to me that if Kill la Kill were to get another game, it would have to be made by Platinum. Platinum is basically the video game version of Studio Trigger. They both do insane spectacle fights and both have successful properties where a woman fights a god while wearing skimpy clothing and delivering one-liners. It just makes sense. Now, with the gameplay, I'll be the first to admit I've never played Bayonetta, so I can't comment on what to take from that game, but I think Kill la Kill would probably be closer to Metal Gear Rising anyways with the sword-based combat. Plus a bit of Nier Automata with the cute anime girls committing deicide. You'd have different combos and abilities with the scissor blades, plus a big blood meter that acts as health and mana, so doing an insane move would actively drain your blood and you'd need to defeat enemies or find healing to restore it. Also, just imagine Zandatsu from Metal Gear Rising, but it's you slicing off your opponent's clothing. That would be the funniest shit ever and definitely appropriate for the tone of the show. The game would, of course, have you playing as Ryuko and going through the main plot of the anime. Though, with Kill la Kill If already doing a different story, I think this game could easily change up the events of the plot to accommodate more battles, especially against lots of fodder characters, so you can have those moments of tearing through like 100 dudes before getting to fight each of the bosses of the anime. And then the bosses would, of course, be these gigantic spectacle fights. The show already sets them up as having really unique abilities and fighting styles, so translating each of their abilities to video game boss mechanics would just be extremely straightforward. And then that's basically it, just an expanded and gamified plot of the show with tons of cool fights and different abilities to unlock. Plus, if any game were to have cool character costumes, I think Kill la Kill makes the most sense, considering different outfits tie into the plot of the show. Like maybe in this story, we can have Ryuko change aspects of her Junketsu to give her different abilities and buffs and moves, and it reflects on her being dressed differently. There's a lot you could do with something like that. The whole game would just be balls to the wall and almost definitely R-rated just based on exposed skin alone, but I think it would be cool as hell. And speaking of hell, you've got Chainsaw Man. Goddamn, my segues are on point today. Chainsaw Man is the hottest shit right now. They're the cute girl at prom, everyone wants to ask them out, and I'm sure we're gonna get some very mediocre tie-in games in the next few years as the anime keeps going. But what would a good Chainsaw Man game look like? Well, a lot of people would think a big gory hack and slash game, which definitely needs to be a part of it. But I think the best part of Chainsaw Man from a video game standpoint is the unique devils that Denji and the crew find themselves up against, and the big city that they fight them in. So my idea for a Chainsaw Man video game is an open world action title, and my two candidates for studios are Insomniac or Sucker Punch. Having made Sunset Overdrive and Infamous, I think both would nail the feeling of a Chainsaw Man open world game. And I would include Radical Entertainment, the studio who made Prototype, because that game is actually the closest inspiration for my idea. Also, they made Simpsons Hit and Run, which is a really cool fun fact, but Radical was sadly dissolved by Activision in 2012, because Activision is evil. Anyways, I would make a third-person action game with you playing as Denji as part of the public safety devil hunters, and you go around hunting different devils across the map. I'm thinking you'd start off with the opening sequence of the anime where you meet Denji and the 4th Division Devil Hunters, because that opening would just also make a great tutorial. And then the game would open up and show you the city of Tokyo? I forget if Chainsaw Man invents its own locations, but basically Tokyo. You'd have the Public Safety Bureau be a sort of base of operations where you could take on missions and interact with the characters, and then the map would be a giant urban landscape. Basically, the two main types of missions would be story missions that loosely follow the events of the anime, and a bunch of contracts to hunt devils. And then in between those, I'd have the Spider-Man system of random encounters, where you might get ambushed by goons or human enemies, or there would be minor devils that would start destroying part of the city and you have to go and deal with them. The game would then feature a traversal system similar to Infamous and Prototype, where Denji can run up walls with chainsaws in his feet, or maybe grind on power lines and train tracks, and then just run and jump around buildings and streets in the city. And definitely make the fast travel system Kobeni's car, because that's hilarious. And then the meat of the game would be the combat, which would definitely be some pretty gory hack and slash, and probably pretty straightforward considering a man made of chainsaws can only really do so much. I'd just give Denji a basic combo system where you can chop people up and switch around who you're targeting like in the Arkham City games, but with the main focus being just relentless aggression as you swing chainsaws around at people. And then throughout the game, Denji can get new abilities and moves he learns like a chainsaw kick or the ability to spin around like a Beyblade. As a mechanic, I would definitely include a blood meter for Denji. He literally restores his power the more people he kills in the manga, so that just translates perfectly to a game. Maybe even include a stagger mechanic that can insta-kill enemies with finishers like the new God of War games. Also, definitely dismemberment mechanics. Basically anything that makes the fights as gory as possible. And that would be it, just roaming around a giant city, killing devils and causing mayhem. I have no idea how a lot of the story would get adapted for a game, but probably a more lighthearted adaptation similar to Sunset Overdrive would work, considering a lot of the show is really goofy. And explaining this as almost a non-canon tie-in would be just fine with me. Really just anything that makes you feel like Chainsaw Man. There have been a lot of Jojo games. All of them have been fighting games. And while that's cool and all, it's also very boring. And Jojo is not boring. So here's my pitch. A JoJo's Bizarre Adventure mystery puzzle game. You see, Jojo is popular because it's weird as fuck, and because the world and characters and stories are so unique. And so I think a proper game made about the franchise should be just as weird and unique. And it should cater to the unique plot structure of the anime. In each part, the main bulk of the story is made up of this sort of formula that Araki has invented for the series. That being that a group of stand users, along with the main character, are all going to complete some objective, and they are continually stopped by an evil stand user who they must defeat. And most of the time, each episode is just a new stand user with a new power, and the gang has to figure out what it is and how to stop them. And that sounds like the perfect idea for a puzzle game. Basically, the game would be a sort of point-and-click adventure, where you play as the protagonist in a Jojo part. Every level has you go through a new area where you know a stand user is after you, but that's it. And then the game is about using clues and the environment to figure out who it is, what their stand is, and how to stop them. I'd make the game almost like Super Hot, where time is frozen to let you think, but each action you take to try and uncover the mystery moves it forward a bit, and you only have a limited amount before the level is over. The available actions you'd have would be interacting with every object, talking to people, as well as having each of your group members use their stands to varying effects. And you have to use them in different combinations to solve the mystery and defeat the stand user before time runs out and you die to their stand. There could even be a second part of the puzzle that turns into combat, where once you find the stand user, you have to figure out how to use the group's stands to defeat them, which is very similar to how fights in the show are all presented as these games of chess between people, using different stands to counter others and thinking ahead of your opponent. And the whole game is just different campaigns throughout the Jojo parts, with different group members and different stand users they have to fight. Because I think that something like a puzzle game is just perfect for Jojo. It fits so well, it's weird, and I think it would actually be fun as a puzzle game for people who might not be into them, because you have the action element of the stand users and all of the fighting. All I'm saying is think about it. Just give me a call, Araki, I'm open to negotiations. And here we go, the big conclusion. The anime video game to end all anime video games, and an adaptation of the manga that literally inspired everything fantasy you've ever heard of in your life, Berserk. Now, I'm not even gonna beat around the bush. We all know what kind of video game this has to be. If you've watched my channel before, you know I love the genre, and if you know about the genre, you know Miura's work. I want a Souls-like action RPG Berserk game made by From Software. Now, if you are somehow unaware of the connection, then oh boy do I have news for you. You see, Demon's Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, Elden Ring, and almost everything FromSoft is known for is from the mind of Hidetaka Miyazaki. He's an auteur in his own right, comparable to Kojima in his direct influence over every game they make. And he is the biggest Berserk fanboy in the world, to the point that nearly every single part of every single game that From Software puts out has more Berserk references than you can count. A character has cool armor, it's probably from Berserk. Dudes wielding a big sword, Berserk. The big-ass tree that the entire plot of Elden Ring revolves around, that's from Berserk. I mean, entire bosses, including the one I named my channel after, are just copies of Guts with the details changed around. People have been literally begging for a Berserk FromSoft game since a comment I found from 9 years ago, left on a Dark Souls 1 DesignWorks translation. I cannot stress enough how hyped up this collaboration is. And it's because of all this that even though there are other studios who could make a good Berserk game, I can't in good conscience pick anyone other than Miyazaki and From Software. You know, a studio like Santa Monica could make a killer Berserk title. Something cinematic like their new God of War games, that would be awesome. But From Software just has to do it. I would go insane if they didn't at least get an opportunity, because I just know that they would put so much effort and love into a Berserk game if given the chance. So then, what would the game be? I know a lot of people criticize FromSoft for all their games being similar. I even made the critique myself in my Elden Ring video. But while I think their general structures have been similar since Demon's Souls, there is more nuance than that. And Sekiro alone proves they can make a game focused on a singular, developed character with their own movesets and abilities and mechanics. So a FromSoft Berserk game could easily be made like Sekiro, giving Guts his own moveset, which would be similar to the already available Ultra Greatswords in every Souls game, except now with much quicker and more brutal combos because Guts can swing Dragon Slayer around like a maniac. Then give him defensive dashes, a block, a parry, plus all of his equipment. A repeater crossbow, throwing knives, bombs, and oh yeah, his mechanical arm that turns into a cannon that was the inspiration for the mechanical arm in Sekiro. Guts would then learn more abilities throughout the game and get more of his equipment unlocked, probably implementing a more traditional level up system than just Souls, with special moves and certain counters being unlocked, again just like Sekiro. And of course, you'd be able to put on the Berserker armor for various fights, which would basically turn you into the Dark Souls boss and just have you jumping around and cleaving monsters in half, though probably relegated to certain fights as part of the story. The only mechanic I don't quite have down is the classic FromSoft resurrections for the full Souls-like experience, because while I haven't read enough Berserk to know the whole story, as far as I'm aware, Guts is just always a normal mortal dude. So having the classic immortality plot point doesn't really work. However, I do have an idea. You see, a lot of Berserk is told through flashbacks, so having the plot of the game be told as a flashback or memory from Guts would be a good implementation. Maybe having him rest at campfires is the game's checkpoint system. You know, he sleeps in the flashback as part of the game and it lets you choose where to wake up. And every death has the flashback reset so that you have to begin again from the last campfire. It's either that or FromSoft just drops the death mechanic entirely, but I'd honestly rather they keep it. And then with all that as the base gameplay, I would definitely have the game be open worlds, or maybe even a bunch of interconnected open worlds using the flashback storytelling as a basis. You could do like 4 or 5 interconnected worlds that Guts can travel between, using the campfires to sort of change what memory he's in. That way it can feel like a grander story with a larger world than what something like Elden Ring could even do. And it would also let you jump around between different arcs and different points in Guts' life. And then each world would naturally have its own apostles and monsters and legendary human enemies. And the entire driving force of the game is just trying to kill them all, with the narrative thread being Guts in the future remembering all this, maybe even talking to other characters in the story in the future about it. Ultimately, I think a FromSoft Berserk game would be amazing. It's something that I think everyone who likes the genre wants. To be honest, I don't know why it hasn't happened already, because out of any Fate game I've covered in this video, and any I could possibly think of, this is the one that I feel actually needs to be made. So there you go, hypothetical anime games that I would make, how they would work, and who I'd want to make them. Let me know which one was your favorite in the comments and what other anime you'd love to see get a video game adaptation. While this video was very different to most of my usual content, I really enjoyed making it. I actually really like coming up with video game ideas and just ideas for stuff like this in general. It's actually something I do for fun when I'm bored, even without the motivation of a YouTube channel. There's just so many cool game ideas you can make out of nearly anything, and it's a shame that discussion about them is a bit hard to find. I haven't really seen anything exactly like this on YouTube before, and I'd love to make another one if people like it enough. It could be a fun little series, who knows? Like I said in the beginning, if you enjoy the topic and want to see an extended cut where I go into more detail on each of these games, then check that out on my Patreon. Every video I make from now on gets uploaded there ad-free and without cuts or censorship that I might do for the YouTube version. It's pay what you want, starting at just $1 a month, and gets you extended videos, behind-the-scenes discussions, and your name in the credits like these cool people. So go check it out. And as always, hope you're doing well, and I'll see you next time.